Partly that mitigation isn't currently practicable as the flats are already occupied, but it strikes me condition 33 is quite clear that any phased measures that form part of an attenuation scheme shall be completed prior to the occupation of any proposed residential development that requires protection. Now, that being the case, I mean, Hill say that they chose to make the development available as if it was some great act of charity. It strikes me they've chosen to make dwellings available when maybe they should not have done. It also strikes me that the smaller the flat, the more important it is for the residents to be able to get some fresh air, to be able to escape a sense of entrapment or enclosure. And for that reason, I think that the sealed box solution clearly isn't open to the residents, maybe imposing completely unacceptable living standards on them. We're also told by the developer that the British standard is a movable standard, and indeed has been moved, but he also told us that those are just guidelines. And that being the case, I think it's perfectly within our power to choose to be more demanding rather than less when it comes to protecting a decent quality of life for our residents. So I, for one, Chair, have no compunction at all in rejecting the recommendation of the officer over this.
Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, clearly this goes back in time to when the condition was actually put in place, but clearly at the time somebody thought the condition was achievable, otherwise why would they have put it in place? Reality is such that the assessment levels have shown that it is not being achieved at this moment in time, and residents have made that perfectly clear in terms of the impact it's having on them as to what that has caused. But we, clearly as the Planning Committee, are being asked to consider a removal of the condition, not an amendment to the condition. It was interesting that I accept the new industry standard is 55 decibels, but we're not being asked to increase the condition from 50 to 55. We've been asked to take it away completely, which is an interesting approach. In terms of the practical solutions, I think we've had a few references to possible solutions, and various ones have clearly been considered over recent times. But have they been exhausted? Have those solutions, have those possible ways to sort of, if not achieve the full 50 or certainly reduce the average levels, been tried and explored sufficiently for us to believe that this condition was unmeetable at the, in hindsight at that time. I don't think I've seen evidence that there's been enough exploration of solutions. There are all sorts of technical engineering and building solutions to all sorts of problems these days that I think should be fully explored, and clearly it may involve some sort of retrofitting in terms of construction, but I can't see the evidence that has been fully explored at this moment in time. So I'm not convinced we should be relaxing this condition as yet. I accept that the applicant has a limited control of the use of the road, although they do have obviously a responsibility for construction of that road. And again, changes to the levels of traffic and the routing of traffic is not within their control, but they have the ability as partners in the overall development to work with others to try and perhaps affect that in some shape or form also. I think there's two strands of work that should be done, and until I've seen evidence of that has been explored and exhausted, I'm not going to relax this condition, Chair.
Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. Much of what I wanted to say has just been said by Councillor Blanco, so I will be somewhat shorter than I was intending. I absolutely share his view that I don't see the evidence here, and I haven't heard the evidence from the developer today, that they have tried everything. It seems to me that they have tried very little, in fact. And given that situation, I don't think that we're as yet in a position where we should be relaxing this condition. I think it was absolutely in the developer's interests to sell these flats off before the road was functioning, which is what they did. and that given that they sold them off with a condition in place, it is absolutely their duty, kind of in fairness, to make sure that they have done everything they can to meet the conditions which were imposed and which were in place when people bought their flats. So they bought them under an expectation that that's what would be available. And I particularly think that the points raised by the resident about the road surface and the traffic calming measures are things which I know can make a very significant difference to noise levels. We've heard about the large difference that reducing the noise levels, even by a few decibels, can have. So I think that we're nowhere near the place where we should say that this is unachievable. Thank you.
Councillor Tunnicliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have sympathy for anyone who's suffering from noise problems. It's very disturbing. But to be fair and balanced, anybody buying a flat in this particularly narrow road must have known that it was going to be noisy. It seems to be quite self-evident, but I do very much sympathise. I think this is a case where we should be looking for compromise. I think from my personal point of view, I find it very difficult to know the difference between 50 and 55 decibels, and what I would really like to ask is that we have the opportunity to visit and experience for ourselves what these noise levels actually are, because talking of figures in the abstract I find difficult to make a judgment. So my vote would be for a compromise that accepts the realities of this road but finds ways to mitigate the noise problem.
If I may be allowed to say a few words. First of all, it seems to me that what's emerging from this discussion is that the development of CB1 hasn't been shown to be able to reconcile the interests of all the users of that development, and that the ones who are currently losing out are the residents of Great Northern Road. And I agree very strongly with those who have said that we should ask the developers, in association with, in cooperation with residents, with councillors, with officers of this council, with representatives of the Highway Authority and others, that we should ask them to sit down together and say, we are not minded to remove this condition 33, and we require you to come back with suggestions, viable, practical suggestions by which noise can be mitigated along that road. This may involve a different surface treatment for the road. It may involve street planting. It may involve traffic calming. It may involve the rerouting of traffic. It may involve winter balconies, sound absorbent ceilings, and a whole host of other measures about which I know nothing, but which I'm sure technical experts, who I think should also be required to join in the discussion I'm proposing, that they could come up similarly with recommendations for how noise can be mitigated. It simply isn't going to be good enough to say, too bad, you bought into a noisy street and you've now got to live with the consequences. We believe that the residents were given something like a promise that the problem of noise would be attended to, and that living conditions, particularly on their balconies, would be sustainable. It's now clear that that has not been, that promise has not been honoured, and I think we should defer this application to give the parties concerned an opportunity to explore what practical, viable measures could be introduced to deal with the problem. Are there any other councillors who wish to speak? Councillor Smart.
Thanks, Chair. It's a bit tricky because normally we don't look at changing things we've got on the table, we look at what we've got and then make a decision. So it's sort of implicit in this application that we're sort of looking at how things could be changed, but we can't do that. The applicant has to come to us with a proposal and then we can look at that. I'd also say that, I've lived in 2 houses in Cambridge as a resident, which is what all us councillors are, and both times I've moved out of the house where the building work has been done, at my cost, of course. But in this case, it would be the applicant's cost. So there is that. I've got a few questions. So the noise that we're talking about, I noticed the sensors are outside the buildings. So these are questions for the officer. So I take it we're talking about the noise on the outside, not the inside of the dwellings. Also, Fernando said quite correctly, and it's also been said, but I want to reiterate that, and I know a bit about this because I've sat on committees talking about the noise from the airport, where we had noise experts and such like as well, and we haven't got today, interestingly, that the decibel scale is a logarithmic scale, so that it's a doubling every 10 decibels basically, so it's not like 60 is a bit higher than 50, it is actually double the amount of noise, and that's a very significant increase, of course. The other thing that has been mentioned is pollution. I don't know if that's a part of this consideration, but aside from noise pollution, there will be particulate pollution from diesel taxis going up and down that road in the canyon effect of the road, and that's a factor, and speed bumps do make that worse, in fact, as people speed up and slow down. So I don't know if we want to consider that or not, but it is a significant factor for people outside on balconies. The applicant talked about guidelines, not limits, is that correct? Smaller balconies, read guidance, is that correct? And what was the other thing? Can't read my own writing. Forget that bit. So we're talking about a condition that we put on this application, and now it has to be taken away because the applicant can't meet it. Well, that seems an odd way of working. So if we put a condition on, we should expect the conditions to be met, unless there's a good reason why not. And it appears from all that's been said so far as the applicant was made aware of the challenge of meeting that condition right from the start and chose not to make that work. So, like others, I guess I'm minded to feel that the applicant needs to work harder on this and perhaps come back to us. What I would also say is that I don't know if it's appropriate, because of course we can go to sites anyway and listen to the noise ourselves, but whether it might be appropriate to have a councillor visit, planning committee visit to site and be on one of the balconies and listen to the noise ourselves, which I think might be quite useful in the future. And just to finish up, we're talking about a very technical matter here, decibels, and we've got no expert in the field talking to us about that. We've just got officers who are not experts in noise and ourselves to consider it. And I would suggest that we do need an expert to advise on this matter. And again, going back to the work I've done with the airport noise, we had an expert come in and create levels of noise that we could experience and consider what was good and what was not good. And we can either go to site or we can do that here, but something along those lines needs to be done, I think, so that we have some real world feel for what we're talking about, because numbers are one thing, but actuality is another, and I think we need to experience that noise level.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blank.
Yeah, just need to point out a couple of things, Chair. I mean, the figures on which this is being based are clearly average levels, spread over a day, over a week, over a period of time, and are therefore measured and judged on an average level. The average level is being exceeded. That's the crux of the matter. If you go at a certain point in the day, you may not hear much at all. It's a hit and miss, isn't it? I mean, there's no point going unless you're going to be there for a length of time that you're not going to be able to sustain. That's why you have the monitors fixed at appropriate point. In terms of the the sort of the matter of substance. Clearly, the condition was put in place to safeguard the interests of future residents. It was not challenged at the time, but clearly, in hindsight, applicants are saying we can't meet it, therefore take it away. I think what we're saying is well, we're not sure, actually you tried every conceivable means to try and meet it, and therefore, until you have shown us that, we're not going to relax that condition and it will be kept in place. That will clearly require technical expertise, but that's not for us as planning committee members to facilitate. That's for them to try and deal with and provide an answer to this problem they found themselves in and found the residents in. I think the issue is, do we relax the condition and the application is to remove it? And I would say certainly not.
Right, I'm going to ask the officer if he would now respond to the many, many questions which have been raised by our discussion. Over to you.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just say a couple of words first, please. I just wanted to comment on the request for having some sort of expert guidance in the room in terms of assisting you to make a decision. I'm of the view that you don't need to have that in this scenario, because unlike the airport applications, in those cases you were trying to think about predictions of how noisy something might be. What we brought forward to you today is based on real world situations. So I don't think that, you know, the fact is that they exceed these set down limits, and that's the situation. So I don't think having an expert is going to help us any further forward with that. But Margaret's obviously got some detailed questions.
And just to add to that, I don't think anyone is contesting, including the developers, that those noise limits have been exceeded. Michael.
Yeah, just to come back a few points on Councillor Smart raised. In terms of noise, that is taken on the outside of the building, so that's not the internal measurement, that's based on balconies. They factor in, for example, the distance from that balcony and the road, and also it's not being in the balcony, so there's some slight adjustments made in the acoustic assessment, but so environmental health haven't disputed that, so the results are there. In terms of air pollution, as the condition relates to noise, I don't think it would be reasonable in going into considering that. So the British standard, I mean, it is a guideline. In fact, it's not Bristol policy that you have to adhere to British standard. It's a guideline for informing decisions, so I treat it as guidance. And on the sort of size of the balconies, that refers again to that British standard. If I read from the British standard itself, other locations such as balconies, roof gardens and terraces are also important in residential buildings, where normal external to meter space might be limited or not available, for example in flats and apartment blocks, etc. In these locations, specification of noise limits is not necessarily appropriate. Small balconies may be included for uses such as drying, washing or growing pot plants, and noise limits should not be necessary for these uses. However, the general guidance on noise in amenity space is still appropriate for larger balconies, roof gardens and terraces, which might be intended to be used for relaxation in high noise areas. My interpretation is that I think you could look at this as a large balcony, given that people, I have physically seen seats out there on the balconies, and we've had third parties come in and say they do use it in that manner, so I see it as a large balcony myself. Yeah. But I think those are the main points.
Now, let me just put before you the situation that we're facing. I believe that this committee is minded to reject the officer's recommendation. I'm going to put to you the officer recommendation. If you do not accept it, that does not mean you have refused. What it means is that we will then be faced with several options. We can defer, we can introduce the protocol, or we can reject. So those will be the three options that will follow from your decision not to accept the officer's recommendation. So I'm going to put to you, with respect to this Councillor Steele, Councillor
Sorry, just so I can be clear, Chair, so because this isn't a straightforward planning application, it's an application to get rid of a condition, does the same apply in terms of the protocol for the adjourned protocol, that it will come to the next meeting, or is it a longer period potentially?
Councillor Sarah, would you answer that question?
course, Chair. And this is a major application, therefore the adjourned decision protocol applies. But of course, the protocol, the start point of the protocol is whether you use it or not. You don't have to use it. It also doesn't say you have to bring a report back to the next committee. I do have some concern about the concept of deferral on this application because it's been with us now for a considerable amount of time, and we have been exploring with the applicant what alternatives there are. My view is really we've got to the point where we ought to be making a decision on it, but that's obviously for members to decide.
Thank you. Right, we will come to that stream when we have to cross it. But meanwhile, the officer recommendation is to approve. Those in favour, please indicate. Therefore, the officer recommendation is not accepted. We have had a proposal for deferral, and that has been very considerably discussed. We've had a suggestion that the protocol can come into force, but Sarah has explained that there has already been, this application has already been with us over a long period of time, and this might be thought to be further unnecessary delay. It seems therefore to me that you are faced with the question of whether you're prepared to reject this application. It then becomes the developer's responsibility to decide whether they will come back with another application for dealing with this problem, or we will have to face the possibility of the developer making an appeal or whatever. That's for them to decide. So I'm going to put it to you that those in favour of a deferral, please indicate. Those in favour of rejecting this application, please indicate. That is unanimous. The application is rejected. Right, and the reasons for refusal are that we are not satisfied as a committee. Please, you will find the word that insufficient efforts have been made to discover, to find solutions to the noise problem, which it is generally regarded is in excess of acceptable standards. So we don't countenance the removal of that condition on the grounds that further explorations, we believe, could considerably mitigate